Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blue Soak, where Dave and myself are going to look back over Leinster's victory in the Pro 14 final and, of course, look forward to our mammoth game against the Saracens on the weekend and all the other Heineken Cup action. Poor John is in a rehab clinic, drying out after his excessive boozing over the past 6 months on lockdown. So, Dave, what is it, our third Pro 14 victory in succession? Our 25th victory in a row. This team just doesn't know when to stop winning, does it?
It doesn't. It has that, I suppose it's a cliche to call it a winning culture, but that's what it has. And it's in a position where it doesn't even have to, play particularly well to win, certainly in the Pro 14. If it's in any way switched on. I mean, we saw it last week and we saw it this week. Last week, Munster scored in the first, 5 minutes, and then didn't score again. And it was the same in the Pro 14 final. Ulster, scored in the 4th minute, and then didn't trouble the scoreboard operator for the remaining 76. Now that's not to say that Ulster played poorly. Ulster played quite well in patches, and they had some good players, but Leinster just slowly smothered them. I've often used the analogy before of cooking a lobster. You put it into the cold water and bring it to the boil, and it doesn't thrash around. And that's what Leinster do. They they bring a team in, they just slowly raise the temperature and the intensity, and before they know it, they're cooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that we were just able to absorb all that pressure. They got off to a flying start. You kind of think, oh, this actually could be Ulster's day, when they got those 5 points in the first few minutes when Hume scored, and then they just was that
a good try? It must be said.
Yeah, it was, absolutely. And we just kind of, our line out malfunctioned, kind of, for whatever reason. I mean, we can go through that in more detail, but we just absorbed all this pressure, and we made tackles. We just realigned all the time, got into their defensive position, and they couldn't find a way to get through us. And as a result, I think we just frustrated them to death. And, even that intercepts try, that's just boils down to people rushing, because they can't, they've exhausted all possibilities, and there's nothing left on, and they just try and force the ball pass, where the throw pass where they shouldn't, because they're almost panicking.
Well, I particularly watched the defensive line during this match. When I watched it again, I decided to pay particular attention to that. And people talk about aggressiveness and intensity, and people often take it to mean that you're aggressive or you're very intense when you're actually committing an action. But there's an aggressiveness and an intensity in the way Leinster players get back on the line, and that's a goal in itself. That they keep the line, and it's always in position. There's no holes in it. There's no dog legs in particular, and that kind of intensity and determination to do the right thing at every single point of the game is often overlooked, because when people talk about aggression and intensity and determination, they're talking about what you're doing with the ball in hand or what you're doing to tackle a guy. But it's also about stuff about getting your ass up off the ground and getting back into the line, so the guy you're standing beside isn't left isolated or isn't left facing a disadvantageous situation. And that's one thing that Leinster have. Now, whether it'll be enough next week, we'll talk about that. But certainly against Ulster, who didn't play particularly badly, but found themselves running out of players with ideas in the right position, because Leinster were just so resolute in keeping that line and in isolating guys and in driving guys back and in not committing bodies to the breakdown. Ulster found it very, very hard to create any kind of overloads whatsoever.
Yeah. Defense won that game for us. And we gave them opportunities. And I mean, I can't remember how many poor lineouts we had. I can certainly think of 4 or 5.
Yeah.
I thought, oh God, has everything just gone to pot? When Kelleher nearly kind of panicked and he takes a quick throw to Cian Healy and it didn't work. That's almost a sign of desperation that things aren't working, and maybe somebody said, oh, maybe there's so many Leinster guys in the Ulster team that they know our calls. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it definitely didn't work. But you know, they were able to kind of fix it eventually. I thought it was noticeable we didn't throw much ball on James Ryan. I mean, maybe they were trying to protect him.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Maybe he was and there's an element of this as well, because I remember I think it was Robin McBride saying it before the whole return to play started, that one of the worries about playing in an empty stadium was that, and this is before we knew we were going to have like the EA Sports noises or whatever, but one of the worries about playing in an empty stadium was that the team, a future opposition, be watching the match on television and could hear all your calls. Now, that's not necessarily.
Are they in the stadium, or are they just?
They're not in stadium. They're not in stadium. They're added to the pictures
by the TV company. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but the question is, I don't know now. Well, I do know one thing. I know, for example, that when we were making the Leinster Rugby, the double DVD or the treble DVD, and we went to get match footage of the Leinster Biarritz game, that came without commentary. So we got a DVD from Sky, and it just had the match and the crowd noise. So so teams go to the TV stations to get copies of games. So you'd wonder if, that being the case, that the DVD that Saracens will get, and will be perfectly entitled to, this isn't anything nefarious, they're entitled to get coverage of the match coverage from the broadcast partner. You'd wonder if that didn't have the crowd noise on it, would that have the line-out calls, or an audibility of calls and stuff like that Leinster wouldn't want exposed? I don't know, but I'm only speaking from my experience of working with broadcasting.
Yeah, I'm sure it works both ways, though. You know.
Oh, it certainly does. Yeah, yeah. I mean, Saracens were quite careful in their selection last week against Exeter, and what I was really looking forward to has been a big game, and both teams played basically.
It was like their seconds, right?
Yeah.
But like, I mean, we kind of rested a couple of notable players from our team. You know, we'll go through when we're looking at the Saracens selection, but Ross Byrne, you know, we spoke about it last week. I think he was rewarded for all of his efforts that he's put in this season, getting Leinster, or significantly contributing to Leinster getting to the Pro 14 final again. It is remarkable that somebody can just receive all the criticism that he does, yet he still can't. I thought it was one of his best performances for Leinster. He gets a lot of stick. He's like, I don't think he's going to be the next, you know, Owen Farrell or Johnny Sexton, but he is a very accomplished rugby player and deserves more credit than he gets for.
Yeah, he's not going to be a guy who starts for the lines, right? But he's still a really, as you say, he's an accomplished elite level rugby player. That, you know, when we put him into games, he never fails. He never lets Leinster down. I mean, he's played in big games before. I mean, when we went through that time when we had a lot of out-half injuries, when Johnny got injured and then Joey got injured and he had to start a European Cup game. He didn't let us down at all. And that was a huge jump in level. I always think, I've said this before, but I always think Leinster play much better with an orthodox, and I include Johnny in this, as an orthodox fly half, a controlling fly half, if you like, rather than a running fly half. I always think that Leinster play much better with a guy like Johnny or a guy like Ross than they do with a guy like Felipe or a guy like Mads or a guy like Joey Carberry. But that's just a personal observation. I mean, Ross Byrne, to go back to your point, Jamison Gibson Park, a lot of the guys who got us to that final got to start in the final. I thought that was important. It was important that Rory O'Loughlin came on as well, for example.
Yeah, you know, and I think like it shows, like you were saying about getting up off the line in defence. You know, I read a little article on what Dan McFarland was saying today. Like, I think he's got a master's in psychology, and he mentioned a couple of quotes in it, kind of military quotes.
Yeah, that was a brilliant quote. I know the one you mean.
Yeah, and it was like rather than fighting for, you know, you fight for the men that are around you, and you fight for your friendship. And like, if those fellas are screaming at each other to get up off the ground, to get back in the line, to make the tackle, and to repeat and keep doing it, and not give away any penalties, you're doing that for the people that you respect, and the guys that are and if like, that they've got a team and they're trying to keep 53 players, 54, whatever the stats are, trying to keep all those guys motivated and happy and interested. And like, you could quite easily turn into, say, the '07 World Cup squad, where there was the first 15 and the rest just were going off having pizzas and wandering around, and not that bothered, because they knew that unless there was a highly unlikely set of circumstances, none of them were going to get selected. And we've got 53 guys. You got to keep them all motivated, and one of the ways is to do that is to reward them for their efforts they put in, and to give Gibson Park and to give Ross Byrne an opportunity to play in a final. Likewise, I mean, Josh van der Fleer, who's positioned probably for the first time in his career in, say, 5 or 6 years, starting for Leinster, is under significant pressure now from Will Connors. And he was given an opportunity. Now, his situation might be slightly different to Ross Byrne. Ross Byrne knows that he's got the Irish captain in front of him. Whereas, van der Fleer started in the World Cup. Will Connors, I'm not sure. I don't think he's got capped yet. And, he's biting at his heels. He comes out and he puts a man of the match performance in.
Yeah.
Like, at least the only thing he can do is just be able to go in to training on Monday and say, that was my best, lads. That's what I've given you.
Yeah.
Whether you select me for the big game against Saracens is up to you. I can't give any more.
Yeah, no, I thought that quote you're talking about, the one from Dan McFarlane, I thought that was an exceptional example, like about guys joining an army for patriotism and mom and apple pie. But the reason why they fight and the reason why they kill isn't for that. It's for their friends. It's for the guy next to them in the foxhole kind of thing. And that's very true. I mean, and to a certain extent, he was using it to justify, or not using it to justify, but as an explanation about how guys can move from one province to another that's not their own province. And it's a very valid justification. I completely accept it. But it's also true when you're playing for your province. To a certain extent, you're not playing for your province. You're playing for the guys you sit beside in the changing room, the guys you train with every week. You're doing it for your friends, as the original quote says.
Yeah. I suppose, like, if you think, okay, we made a few significant changes for that final, but we made massive changes to the team that played Ulster 2 weekends before. Not too dissimilar scoreline. We won 27-5 on Saturday. 2 weeks previous, we won 28-10. So, like, that's an aggregate scoreline of 55-15. And one of those teams was our second. Like, it was our seconds. There was 15 people rotated in from the first Munster game, and I suppose that leads me on to going back to the Pro 14. Like, I watched a podcast on RTE today, this evening, and like they were kind of denigrating the Pro 14, more or less saying that it was a crap standard. Like, I mean, it's not a crap standard. It's just that Leinster are very good. Now there are some poor enough teams in it, but like, I just went through the after 15 rounds of games, I'm going to kind of discount the South African teams because they only played 13, right? But we scored 531 match points, which is 106 points more than any other club. Munster been the next down at 426. We scored 18 more tries than any other club, which was actually Zebre was the second. We scored 74 tries, 56 was Zebre's. And we ended up with 69. We accumulated 69 points, which was 18 better than Edinburgh, which is like a quarter more points. So it's just that we're a really good team,
That's what I mean.
It's like when we were growing up, the All Blacks, and probably they still are, were just so far ahead of everyone else. And when Ireland used to go and be beaten out the door by 40 or 50 points, or when they'd come to Dublin and, we put up a spirited performance for 50 minutes, and then they'd win it in the last half an hour or 20 minutes. they were just that good. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and we've, like, Leinster have achieved a position in Pro 14 standard of just been excellent. And there was very little criticism of when Munster were that good 10 years ago, or when the Ospreys were that good 8 years ago.
The same sporting hipsters who denigrate the Pro 14 would tell you that there's no other league to watch in soccer than La Liga. And La Liga is the same. If you look at La Liga, or you look at even the Bundesliga, you've got, certainly in La Liga, you've got Barcelona / Real Madrid, whoever's good that year, usually skites off into the distance, leaving the rest behind. At one point, Valencia finished third in in La Liga, and they were closer to the relegation places than they were to the team in second. Now, nobody would suggest La Liga is a crap league. It's not. It's the league that produced World Cups and all this kind of stuff. But it just happens to have, at this point in time, or maybe not quite now, but a couple of years ago, just happened to have exceptional teams in it, right at the very top. And I think that's what we have in the Pro 14. Is the Pro 14 all it should be? No, it's not. Is it all it could be? No, it's not. But it's not Leinster's fault. The Pro 14 isn't crap because Leinster are dominating it. Leinster are dominating it because they're very, very good.
Yeah, but like, it will only get the recognition if the other teams bring, and I suppose this was my point from last week was,
but just to go back to my La Liga example, just to go back, that was why Real Madrid were so obsessed with winning the European Cup in the 50s, because it justified their dominance in the Spanish league when everyone said, oh, the only reason they're winning is because of Franco, blah, 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 blah. And then they went out and beat everybody else in Europe and beat them off the park. That's, yeah. And to a certain extent, that's what we have to do. We have to be that good in Europe to justify and validate what we do in the Pro 14. Sorry, carry on.
Exactly. And, you know, like, I suppose that's why next weekend's match is very important to us, that it, you know, all of those 25 matches are pretty much for naught. Like, you know, we just need to kind of prove that we are not just very good in our crap league, that we're actually very good rugby team, full stop.
And that in itself will serve the Pro 14, because people will say, as you said, like, people say, actually, it's not a crap league, it's just that they're a really good team. Yeah,
but for the league to be taken seriously, and like, from day one, the league was denigrated and criticised from day one, particularly by Irish journalists who all came up through rugby clubs, and all of a sudden the AIL no longer was taking precedence, and the players were no longer like Svein Lepnoff, you know, Quinny and Frankie Sheehan for the 6 Heineken Cup matches every year, but they got to go back and play for Shannon and Gary Owen and Cork Con, you know, in the AIL. And all of a sudden the Celtic League was introduced, and those players weren't going back to their clubs, and they were remaining with their provinces.
And the Celtic League started off, for those guys, the Celtic League started off in the worst possible way. Best possible way for the league in Ireland, worst possible way for those guys who were pro AIL, in as much as there was a Leinster-Munster final that finished in Lansdowne Road with a big crowd, and it was an exceptionally good final as well. So that added grist to their mill, I suppose, or took grist from their mill, whichever way you want to look at it.
But like, yeah, exactly. And then, but like, you know, it's nothing to do with Leinster being so far away that the league is crap. The other clubs, and like Leinster and Irish rugby, need the other 3 provincial teams to up their game, not kind of to dismantle Leinster and say, oh, well, they're becoming too powerful and too strong, that it's, you know, like I heard some guy on RTE, that podcast, first time I've ever listened to it, Wesley, you know, more or less saying that because Leinster are so strong, that there's a perception that it's just all the private schools, and therefore the perception around the country is that Dublin 4 is just this elite. Like, he's the journalist, he should be trying to write the articles to dispel this bullshit. You know, but anyway, okay. one other thing that came across in that was that Bernard Jackman had, now, obviously he's not involved in rugby anymore, or not involved to the same extent as he was. One thing that very interesting that he said, that he mentioned about the Pro 14, what he had heard the format it was going to take, was that there's going to be a Pro 12 until New Year. So it'll be just the original Pro 12 teams minus the 2 South Africans.
Mm-hmm.
And after the start in the new year, obviously this is all Corona related, dependent, that the 4 strong South African teams are going to come into the league and join.
There's a lot of talk about that. A lot of talk about it in South Africa, indeed. Normally, I've kind of ignored it until I've seen South African journalists writing about it, guys who are connected, and they're writing about it. They want, I mean, the thing is, their rugby culture is not entirely dissimilar to ours. It's village clubs, city clubs, provinces, international team. And their attendance patterns are not dissimilar to ours. They like to go to a rugby match on a Saturday afternoon, or watch one on a Friday night, or watch one on a Saturday night. They can't do that with Super Rugby because of the time difference. They were actually all really looking forward to watching the Munster-Leinster game, apart from the obvious South African interest, because it was a game that was on a Saturday night, and they could sit down with a few beers and watch, and it fitted into their pattern of watching rugby. So obviously the Pro 14 has that advantage in that it'll be on at prime time in South African television, same as it is here. There'll be no, the traveling distances are great. There's no jet lag because you're not crossing time zones. And that means that the large South African television audience, its advertising budgets will come into the Pro 14 or Pro 12 or Pro 16, whatever you want to call it.
One other thing that they mentioned in that was that they said in the old Super Rugby, South Africa contributed about 60% of the income to it. So, New Zealand is obviously the hotbed of rugby, but it's quite a small population, 5 million, in the middle of nowhere. Tupaxi Islands, I think some Australian coach once called it. And obviously, rugby's not that big a sport in Australia. So those two, don't have the same bang for buck as South Africa do. Yeah. And if they can bring, if you've got the Bulls and the Stormers playing and the Sharks playing in the Pro 14, that could only be good for the league. It has to be.
I was watching actually the 2009 Super Rugby final was on. Sky were showing it. The way they're showing all the old games. They're showing the 2009 Super Rugby final, and it was the Bulls against the Chiefs. And the Bulls put 60 points on the Chiefs in the final. But there was a lot of guys kind of who ended up on Irish shores playing. Obviously, Kirchner was playing for the Bulls. Pedri Vandenberg was playing for the Bulls. Mills Muliaina, who was and Craig Clark, who ended up in Connacht, were playing for the Chiefs. Toby Moreland, who ended up in Munster, was playing for the Chiefs. And the Bulls runner, the way the water boy, if you like, the Bulls runner was Johan van Graan.
Was he?
Yeah. So obviously he was a member of the coaching staff, and they use coaches rather than players to be the runners in the thing. And so I was like, oh, geez, the Bulls were some team. That was some bloody team.
Wasn't it just magnificent?
Will we take a look at John's stats vomit?
Yeah, fire away.
Hold on, we'll take a look at it now.
This is John's contribution from his nursing home. He's dragged in all of the players that have played in the Pro 14 this season, along with the positions and who we've used over the course of the Pro 14.
Yeah, it's quite a comprehensive piece of work, actually, isn't it?
It is.
And it does show. I mean, you just list the names. He's lovely writing, by the way, hasn't he? He's a woman's writing.
I think he got his daughter to do that.
I think he might have done, because that's a female hand. Anyway, what would I know about a female hand? Says you, hey. But when you look at the lists of names beside each position, it does show how many players we've used, particularly at tight head. We've used a lot of players at tight head.
7.
Yeah. We do go through an awful lot of players, but
That is a lot when you think there's only, it's like you've got second rows, there's 7.
Yeah.
Or back, like there's 3 positions in the back row,
Yeah.
there's 8 used.
Yeah, and there's 1 position at tight head, and we've used 7 of them. Very attritional position, and well, we don't have to worry about 2 of them next year anyway.
True, that's very true.
Anyway, so you can thank John for that. As I said, stat vomit.
Yeah.
I'm just going to check our social media to see, do we have any questions pertaining to the final? Because most of the questions, I have to say, that came in are about next week. But I just want to see, do we have any that pertain to the final? Because I think most people have kind of just the final was just a kind of almost a. It was like a speed bump before getting to the real meat.
It's the minor game, was it?
It was. Yes, the minor game. That's what it was. And Michael Keogh has a good question, which kind of ties all together. What do you think about Leinster changing the captain's band for nearly every match? This was done a lot last season. I think it is starting to pay off in terms of having a bigger bunch of leaders, all putting their hands up for the team moving into the new season. Yeah, I agree. Having a wider range of experienced guys in the leadership pool can only be a benefit to Leinster.
Yeah, I remember reading something Lancaster, an interview with Lancaster, and he was actually speaking about Ringrose. Said that he was, obviously an Irish international, but he couldn't get over how quiet he was and kind of introverted. And I thought it was an unusual choice of captain but maybe it's to encourage them to come out of their shell a little bit. Yeah. And I know he's on the leadership group, but you kind of got to be on the leadership group if you're got 30 odd caps for Ireland and been a starter on the team for 4 seasons. Yeah. If you're not, then what's wrong with you?
It was actually quite funny, I thought, watching himself and Johnny putting their medals on one another. It was actually cringe. I actually preferred it without any of the dignitaries there. The players did their own medals and then took their own trophy without some suit.
Always nice to see some suit from a marketing agency get doused in Ulmer's or. Yeah. I do like seeing that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they could have thrown somebody into the baths afterwards, but it was nice. And of course, the tradition was continued of if you ever want confirmation of the guy's leaving Leinster, see if he lifts the trophy.
Yeah.
So
it looks like Carney is going.
Oh yeah, it certainly is. But we talk about those at the end of the season, I think. But it was nice to see them getting their moment in the sun.
Yeah, and it's a lovely tradition,
Yeah, it is.
We're not the first club to do it, but
no.
Again, it kind of goes back to zero ego. I suppose that's
comes from Leo.
That's the epitome of Leo Cullen, is what I was going to say. And Lancaster seems to be quite an unassuming kind of bloke as well. A very down to earth, matter of fact man. Leo Cullen doesn't blow his own trumpet yet. He's given somebody else the opportunity to lift the Heineken Cup 3 times, and obviously once as a coach. But just like no one is bigger than the team, and let the guys that have contributed a lot to the club over the last number of years to have that nice little parting gift to lift up the trophy.
Yeah. Absolutely, I love to see it.
Yeah. So Dave, I suppose moving our attention towards the Saracens game, this could, I think I said it before though, about other matches, teams were lying in wait for us, but I kind of do think that we don't know what Saracens are like this year because they haven't played first teams in any other game. They've been mixing and matching. Loads of their guys have vamoosed, but they're still a very good, strong. If you look at if you project first 15, they look a very, very strong side. They're obviously missing some key players, that have I mentioned ones that have left, but also Owen Farrell, who's obviously out for 5 weeks. But like they have had nothing to do since they were more or less told that they were going to be playing in the championship next year, except focus on this one game. You know, like all the other matches were Mickey Mouse to them.
Oh yeah, it didn't matter. They basically had one of the best training schedules ever put together for fitness, for strength and conditioning and fitness, because their training sessions were played at match pace, because they were actual matches. The one thing that's good, and we look through it because we've done a thing gathering together that I mean, Leinster, this will be the third time in recent years that Leinster have played Saracens, once in a quarterfinal, once in a final. And obviously with, time and what's happened to Saracens, there's been a lot of churn in the Saracen squad. So we'll kind of take a look at that, and then we look at what we reckon the projected selections for Saturday will be. Well, we take a look at the teams that played in the 2017 quarterfinal.
Yeah.
18
quarterfinal, wasn't it?
18 quarterfinal. Yes, you're right. So for the purposes of this, I've counted Carney and McFadden as having departed. And Owen Farrell obviously is unavailable, so I've counted him as having departed as well. There's a lot of red on that Scarlet side, or on that Saracen side.
Yeah, particularly their bench.
Yeah, particularly their bench. They've only got 9 out of the 23 that started that day are still at the club. Now, guys like so George Cruz is away, but he's kind of on loan. Same with Alex Lazowski. But then but they won't be back, so they're unavailable. Whereas there's been much less churn for us. I was debating whether to put Dan Levy in red or not, but I suppose he remains available for selection.
If you were selecting your team for Saturday, for our team, how many out of that team would you have to start?
Out of the Leinster team?
Yeah. Like, who would you pick? Pick Ringrose is going to play.
Ringrose, Lowe, Sexton, McGrath.
Yeah.
Healy, Toner, Ryan.
Yeah.
Those would be from the starting team. And I'd have Ruddock, not Ruddock, Porter starting as well.
Yeah. And you might have O'Loughlin on the bench like last week.
Yeah. Well, if we go on to this is the teams as I think they'll line up on Saturday.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with anyone there in that starting 15 for Leinster.
Yeah, the question is over Tadhg Furlong's fitness. And the other question is whether or not you go with Scott Fardy and Rhys Ruddock, or do you go with Scott Fardy and a specialist open side?
Yeah, again, like, hard to know. Like, Van der Fleer did nothing right. Van der Fleer had a fine game last week. If you don't pick Rhys Ruddock this week, like, where does he see himself in the club?
Well, that's the question. I mean, he's well, people forget that Rhys Ruddock is actually only 29 still. He's been around so long, people assume he's much older than he actually is. He's still only 29. So, there's 6 years left in that guy. And if he's not getting a start at Leinster, or not even, coming close, or not making the bench for big games, he would have a legitimate cause to think, well, maybe it might be time to maximise my income and my chances of playing for Ireland in the remaining 6 years. Yeah.
Or he might just say, I'm going to England, or I'm going to France, or Japan.
Or Connacht.
Or Connacht. Or it's...
I mean, when I was looking at the Saracens team, I found it really, really hard to pick their subs because I looked at their entire squad and I really only knew 3 of the guys who I hadn't got starting. Callum Clark, Richard Barrington, and Rotumi Segun. The rest of them,
you're probably going to have Manu Vinopoulou
on the bench, yeah.
Either a 10. Like I would probably agree with you on Alex Good at 10, but he hasn't played a lot there. He did play 10 in I think they played Glasgow in a quarter final a couple of seasons ago, but he hasn't played a massive amount to 10. But I'm sure he could easily fit in again.
Oh yeah. And one thing, while we're looking at teams, because I think this is going to be a key for next week, these are the teams from the final last year. And while Saracens will have a very strong 15 out on Saturday, the one area where they're massively weaker, and it was a key factor in the final last year, is the bench.
Yeah.
They won't be able to bring on players of the standard of Wigglesworth, Koch, Schalkberger, like they did last year. They just won't be able to do that. And that's going to make a big difference. We'll have the edge on the bench next week. Yeah,
and if you remember, I think 2 of their 3 front row went off after 20 minutes. You know, and like, so those lads came on and played pretty well. In the last hour of the game. I watched that game again, and like, again, you know, we were beaten, and I'm not going to try and say we weren't well beaten, but I don't think we were hammered, like as some people would say.
No, we weren't. No.
You know, we were, with about 5 minutes to go in the first half, we were 10-0 up.
Yeah, if we'd made touch, it might have been slightly different.
What's that?
If we'd made touch that time.
Yeah, but like, I thought we gave away quite a soft penalty for the 3, and then we didn't execute getting our touch kick, and we again gifted them. So we went in massively, like, even as a supporter, I remember walking in at half time feeling deflated, going, we should have been going in at half time 10-0 up in a final, and we're going in 10-0. Like, you know, and if I felt like that, how did the players feel?
You know what you were feeling? You were feeling what Leinster have made other teams feel like on a regular basis. Because you know the way we always talk about how Leinster, in the 5 minutes either side of half time, really turned the screw. And the reason for that is so the team goes in at half time feeling like you were feeling.
Yeah. And like, obviously they went through a very purple patch in parts of the second half when they were pounding our line and they got over. And you had Vunipola, you know, kind of unstoppable when he's in that form. It takes 2 guys to take him, to mark him, and you know, we weren't able to deal with him. But in saying that, we had opportunities. Like, Gary Ringrose had an opportunity, he had an overlap, and he didn't take it. You know, we had opportunities in that game. It wasn't like we were beaten by 30 points.
No,
we were beaten by a score. And you know, like, I'm not trying to say that, we was robbed, ref. It wasn't anything like that. They deserved to win, but wasn't a pounding. We didn't take a pounding.
No. I mean, it's a case of we wasn't robbed, ref. Interestingly enough, we were talking about Saracens missing players from the bench. There's so many factors in this game. First of all, there's the fact that, you know, we're after this huge break, this huge lockdown. So we don't know really what effect that's going to have, because all we've seen are little bubbles. We've seen the bubble of the Premiership. We've seen the bubble of the top 14. We've seen the bubble of Super Rugby, or the 2 bubbles of Super Rugby. But we haven't seen teams up against one another from crossing over. So it's very hard to say how the twain shall meet, shall we say. So that's going to be very interesting. You've got the fact that Saracens have obviously lost all those players for whatever reason. They've lost all those players, but then you've got kind of an offsetting factor in a game that's really, really close. You'll see people will say the crowd doesn't make a difference, right? You'll see people say that, it doesn't make a difference. That's just fans patting themselves on the back. It makes no difference. And then you see the home and away records of teams, and the home record is always way, way better. And in a game that's as close as Leinster versus Saracens is likely to be, even if fans only contribute 0.05% of something to the match, in a game that close, that 0.05% could be the difference between winning and losing.
Mm.
So it's going to be interesting to see how they react to the empty bowl.
Yeah. Like, I suppose that they do play in Allianz Park, so they're not.
So you're saying Saracens might have the advantage here?
You never know. You never know. Like, you put up your team, Dave, and I wouldn't disagree with any selection, but like, there is that debate that they are going to have, I think, over Van der Fleer versus Will Connors.
Yeah.
I think Will Connors is going to be employed to chop tackle Vinopola and stop him at source.
He's going to be down Olidiate.
Yeah. Van der Fleer was kind of given a similar job against Corsia again.
And did it well.
And did very well.
Yeah.
So, it's not like, but I do think, like, I think Vinopola can be the difference in that team. And when both Leinster and Ireland played against teams without Vinopola in it, and then when we do play him in it, he kind of is the difference between the two sides sometimes.
Are we both agreed that Dan Levy won't be involved?
No, I don't think. I don't think so. I don't think he's ready, and I think
he could be ready.
I just think I said it last week. Maybe, like, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to play the Dragons and we're going to play
Zebre, is it? No.
Zebre. Yeah. Like, that's a perfect opportunity for him.
Fold him back in.
Like, he can play if we win this game, he gets through those two or one of those two games unscathed and is in reasonably good health. Bring him in and put him on the bench, maybe, for the semi-final.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. I just don't think he's ready to come off the cooker just yet.
He's a prized asset of both Leinster and Irish rugby. Why burn him out? Why rush somebody back and, like, let him get back in his own good time? I mean,
and it's not as if we don't have players there.
Bingo, yeah, exactly. There's fellas in there that have soldiered all season, and done very, very good jobs and sort of made names for themselves. It's not like he had played half the season, got injured, and then, like, don't rush him back. You haven't rushed him back, and he's made good progress. Start him when he's ready. Do you think McGrath? You obviously thought McGrath against Gibson Park.
Yeah, I just went for. I mean, Gibson Park. I mean, one thing Gibson Park does, and he deserves credit for it because he does it repeatedly. So teams must be looking for it. And he still does it and still gets away with it. Is that zipped pass off the base from about a yard or two out? He did it again. He put Lowe in for a try.
He did, and I could just see him get, like, if not saying it, he was definitely mouthing it to Devin Toner. Get out of the bleeding way.
Yeah. It was coming all right. But he does do things like that really, really well. To be honest with you, it's a Nats Tadger between them. I'm seeing as Johnson here, somebody's got to use phrases like that. But I'd go with McGrath. I think McGrath's just a slightly bit better all-round scrum half.
And the other one was Doris. I mean, I don't think his position's under threat, but I'm just getting more and more impressed with that lad. Like, he didn't win man of the match last week. But my God, every attack we had, he was fulcrum to it.
Yeah,
he's I don't like.
He reminds me. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Even though he's playing six, he reminds me so much of Jamie Heaslip. Yeah,
if you think back on the team that played in that, you had it up there a few minutes ago in the final. I was actually going through it last night with somebody, and we were saying, like, the back row looks actually stronger now. The back row in that game was Jack Cronin, Sean O'Brien, and Scott Fardy. And I think the back row that you selected there of Conan, Doris, and Will Connors, I think on form and how that back row played in the final back in May, 2019, I think the current back row is actually in better form, even though, it contained World Cup finalist and the legend Sean O'Brien.
I think, I don't think
Sean O'Brien was quite poor in that game.
Yeah, he wasn't at 100%, and I don't think Jack Conan was 100% either for that game. He'd been out for a long time that season. So I do think that I'd agree with you. Jack Conan's backfiring in all cylinders. Caelan Doris has just had an incredible season. Whether it's at 8 or at 6, I think it's a matter of getting him into the team because he's too good to leave out.
Yeah.
And then whichever of our 7s.
Yeah. Well, it's just frightening that, I don't know, many years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Jamie Heaslip retired. Sean O'Brien had been injured for a while, and then he's obviously gone. So that's 2, stalwarts of the team for nearly a decade taken out of the side. And we've just, there's been no kind of panic. These guys are just slowly tipping away. Even Dan Levy, who probably would have been there and thereabouts, Irish Player of the Year for the for that Grand Slam winning side. Mm-hmm. And he was out for the last 18 months. And there was no kind of panic. It's okay, we've got this conveyor belt of back rows coming through. Like, it's just frightening.
I think it shows good planning if you think about it, because you look at the age Sean was when he left, you look at the age Jamie was when he retired. Rhys Ruddock is still young, but you look, Geno left, McLaughlin, if he'd been able to finish his career, would be retired about now. And you look at all the guys who've come online now, and we, sometimes we wonder about, how come they've taken in so many props and so few centres into the academy? We do this every year, and we think, but they're not thinking about next year or the year after, the year after. That academy, the academy that's picked this year, is for 6 years down the line.
Yeah,
and that's what's happened here. You've got guys like Will Connors, like Caelan Doris, like Max Deegan, who came into the academy maybe 4 or 5 years ago because they knew we'd need players in 2020. Because Jamie would retire, although he had to retire early. Kevin McLaughlin would retire, although he had to retire early. Sean O'Brien would be moving on and stuff like that. So it's the foresight that goes in. It's the entire organizational foresight, not just, the 15 on the pitch. It's the guys in the back room, the guys who are scouting schools, bringing guys into sub-academies, bringing guys into academies that are able to put these guys on the pitch and able to turn over the back row, like you say, in the space of a year.
I know, it's incredible progression planning, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's industry leading.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions on the Twitter machine, and one that's very interesting actually. Ricardo Tiernig asks, barring one knock on at the back of a mall, James Tracy played well last week at 16, but did he do enough to make the bench ahead of Nugget this weekend? And he's assuming that Ronan Keller starts, which I would as well. Now, I had Tracy on the bench more out of, Tracy and Cronin.
Yeah, that was a selection that really surprised me when I saw it last week. And I didn't think that Cronin's demise was so near, so imminent.
Yeah. I suppose the thinking, certainly maybe against Ulster and maybe against Saracens as well, is that, look, let's face it, neither of them are going to be able to hit a cow's arse with a banjo. But Tracy is a power guy.
Yeah.
And maybe that was the thinking. Because Ulster had a lot of power guys on the bench, or we thought they had anyway, in McGrath and Moore. Obviously, we think that Saracens will be, whoever they pick, I don't know them, but I'm sure they're going to be powerful. And maybe that'll be the thinking that overrides again this week. Or maybe they'll go the other way completely. Maybe they'll decide to go with Cronin and decide to run the legs off them. You don't know. But one thing that is a worry is our line-out.
Yeah, and that did, you wonder if there was if obviously it goes without saying the strength of some of the Saracens pack. They probably got the best second row in the world.
And they have the best spoiling second row in the world, particularly. Itoje is an absolute pest.
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
He's the best spoiling second row in the world. So,
but like if you think you've got, I don't know, let's say let's say there's 15 lineouts in a game, and we gave away approximately a third of them.
Yeah.
You're handing over a third of your possession. Like, really, Ulster should have done a lot better.
They should have done.
Considering how much possession they ended up with, they had 58% possession, which it's not that much more than 50-50, but they should have done a lot better with it than we gave them like a better team would have been able to capitalize.
Pardon?
Sorry, Dave. I said a better. Oh, go on, sorry.
Yeah. I said we were able to take it back off them handily enough.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought a better team would have been able to capitalize on our error. It was like we put kind of whatever a 20 odd point winning margin on them. But like, I thought it was quite easy, yet it shouldn't have been.
If we give over a third of our possession from out of touch to Saracens, the next time we see the ball will be when we're picking it up after the conversion.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. Now, the two questions are: is there a systems problem, or is it that was it a problem generated by a restriction of ambition before a big game? It's hard to know.
I don't know. I just was surprised that they didn't throw on Ryan. That they and it seemed to be all sorts, like every error that could happen happened.
Yeah.
At one stage, no one jumped. There was another line out where he threw long and Porter caught it at the tail.
Yeah.
There was another line out without jumping. There was another line out where I mentioned it earlier. He tried to do a little cheeky one, and it clearly hadn't been planned because Cian Healy wasn't alive to it or awake to it. So, and then there was, I think they picked off another one from us. That's just from the top of my head. If we think back to the very first match and Munster's new signing, Snyman, picked off one in the opening couple of minutes against us when we played. While for the 6 minutes he was on the pitch, he certainly won one line out against us.
Oh yeah. Well, in the game against Munster, we had a dreadful line out. In the first game back, our line out was poor. Second and third games, it was fine. And then the fourth game, it was poor again. Now, admittedly, Henderson is a nightmare in a line out. You kind of have to throw away from him.
Yeah, maybe that's why he was marking Ryan, perhaps.
Yeah, he was marking Ryan, so Ryan wasn't used. But, even if you look at the Saracens team or the probable Saracens team, their least starried, but most functional second row is Tim Swinson. And he's a bloody nightmare at a line out as well. I mean, have you ever known a Scot who wasn't acting the bollocks in the line out? And you put him beside, Itoje, who's just he's a living migraine when it comes to the line out. He's just a living walking migraine. So they're gonna have to be on their game, and they're gonna have to get their shit together. Otherwise, if we lose 1/3 of our possession out of touch to Saracens on Saturday, all the 25-game winning streaks in the world won't matter a good goddamn.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've one more question.
Go on, sorry,
Het Brawthorn on Twitter asks, what have Saracens learned about Leinster in the last few weeks and vice versa? Part of me feels we're going to see the difference between Pro 14 Leinster and Heineken Cup Leinster TMDC. Another feels we're going to be dragged into their dogfight and piss it away in anger. There's a couple of good points there to extract from that. Have Saracens or Leinster learned anything about each other in the last couple of weeks? You kind of have to say no, because a lot of powder has been kept dry.
Yeah, but I think we had something to play for, Dave.
Yeah, true.
If you look at, say, the team, okay, we played I wouldn't say a weak team. We made 15 changes from our first match to our second match. We kind of went back for our third match. And then we kind of played, with the exception of maybe 3 guys, our first team in the final. Whereas mean, I don't know what Saracens' first team is. There's loads of them have left. I'm sure there's guys all trying to get contracts elsewhere, maybe, or hoping that they can get a nice deal for a couple of seasons and go back up, because presumably Saracens will go straight back up next season. So I think actually it'd be harder for us to figure out Saracens than them, us.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to get dragged into an arm wrestle with their starting 15 anyway. There's always, it's funny, we've mentioned, and it was a point I wanted to make it, but I wanted to see how the show developed before I said it, and it's developed the way I wanted it. We talked about the Vunipolas, we talked about, Itoje and whatever, and we haven't talked about the two guys who I reckon are actually super key to everything Saracens do. And that's Alex Good, whether he's a fullback or out half, it doesn't matter. He's a wonderful player. And Brad Barrett.
Yeah. This is Brad. I was going to say, this is Brad Barrett's kind of final hurrah.
Yeah.
So, he's kind of Saracens through and through. It's what's he got left to play for if he plays couple of more Mickey Mouse matches next week and the week after in the Gallagher Premiership.
But he's been the guy that has epitomized, people. I mean, we all laughed at Saracens and the Wolf Pack, but I mean the attitude that they show on the pitch, and the way they defend, and the way they never take a backward step, is epitomized and led by Brad Barrett. I don't think he gets enough credit because he's
no.
I think to a certain extent, I mean, attitudinally, I think he's Saracens' Nathiwa. In terms of he sets the tone.
A good analogy for him, yeah.
Yeah, he sets the tone. Alex Good, I think, is a wonderful player. Him and out half could be dangerous because the one thing about Alex Good is he always beats the first man. Always. He has amazing feet. For a guy who doesn't really look he doesn't look like a lithe, swift, dagger-like winger or a fullback or attacking player. He's slightly barrel-chested, he runs very in an upright way. But man, he's a really good player.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I wonder if we saw like it last weekend again. We saw our ability to kind of. I don't think Ulster didn't really use the bomb on Jordan Larmour as much as Munster did. But anything that they did, he seemed to mop up pretty well. And I wonder whether, Saracens might have seen that 2 weeks ago and said, oh, here's an opportunity to get some mileage out of him. And then say in the last two games, he was certainly a marked improvement.
Yeah.
On the opening game against Munster but he hadn't played rugby in 6 months.
Yeah,
so,
people forget that.
It's very easy to kind of say, why couldn't you catch that? Any age you could catch that. But if you haven't been, in the heat of battle for 6 months, I'm sure it's extremely hard. That match against Munster should have been Leinster against Wasps in Donnybrook in front of 4,000 people having pints and hot dogs. I'm watching.
Yeah. Leinster against Ealing Trailfinders or something.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing is, I mean, having just praised Alex Good, he's not going to be able to kick the ball as well or as precisely, although he's a very good kicker, as Owen Farrell, because Owen Farrell is one of the top 3 out halves in the world, maybe even the top out half in the world. So it's going to be more difficult for them to play a kicking game without him there. Now, Alex Good is a brilliant kicker of the ball. Elliot Daly at fullback is a brilliant kicker of the ball. But for that kind of ultra-precise tactical kicking, the loss of Farrell is huge for them.
That was kind of, it was almost another, I probably might be speaking a bit too soon and jinxing it, but almost like the final nail in their coffin, having Owen Farrell suspended for their final games of their season. I think he's actually going to be back. He'll be back in time for the semi-final if they do get in, won't he?
No, he'll be back for the final.
Sorry, fine.
Yeah. If they don't make
we actually never discussed that last week, and it was on my agenda, but I it was only afterwards I realised I hadn't mentioned it. What did you think of Farrell's tackle, by the way?
I thought that what ultimately happened with the disciplinary was the right thing. He got the right ban for it. I think you could tell. I don't know if I presume you saw it. You could tell that he obviously hadn't meant it, and you could tell he was very sorry about it straight away. I mean, in Ireland we have a fairly our view of Owen Farrell is seen through the red rose glasses, if you like, or whatever way you want to look at it. And he is a very aggressive player on the pitch, but I don't think he's a willfully dirty one. I think occasionally I think occasionally his aggression overspills, but at the end of the day, he only has one proven sighting in his entire career.
Yeah, I was listening to somebody.
That's 4 years ago.
In his England career.
No, in his entire career.
Oh, I know that. I know. In his England career, he's played 88. This is, I think, it's 85 tests between England and the Lions. He's conceded 33 penalties, and he's got 2 yellow cards. So that's not a bad record.
It's not a bad
considering
record.
All those big games. And I suppose, people always, because he's one of the most famous players in the world, he has a high shot on a South African. It's, replayed over and over again. He has a high shot on a guy in the Premiership. It's replayed over and over again because he's Owen Farrell. Like I can remember when Johnny Wilkinson was, going back 18, 19 years ago, Johnny Wilkinson was ferocious tackler. Yeah. Now, he kind of did tackle a lot lower, but he drilled you. But he drilled you in the ribs rather than on the collarbone.
If Johnny Wilkinson's tackling was refereed under the same refereeing environment we have today, I'd say he'd have 33 penalties given away and 2 yellow cards. He'd have a similar disciplinary record or a similar reputation anyway to Farrell, because that's just the way it is. I mean, the Autumn International Series was it two autumns ago is the one where you were talking about South Africa and then again against New Zealand, I think, or Australia, I can't remember. Anyway, but that's the one that's dogged him reputationally ever since, even though he wasn't cited, he wasn't carded at the time. So,
but if you remember, Razzie was kind of mimicking him with the tackle bags. Do you remember?
That's right. Yeah.
So like it was.
But he got 10 weeks and he got five off for 50%. I've been reading. I read his actual disciplinary hearing report today. Because generally they give you a chance to appeal, and he hasn't decided to appeal, so it's up online. And I've been reading a couple of them. And the RFU's policy is to start with full 50% mitigation, and then you take the weeks off, depending on whether you've been a bad boy or not. So he
didn't get any weeks off.
You start on the full amount of mitigation. You start on the full 50% off, and then they add them on depending on if you've been a bad boy. Okay. He got the 50% off, and it stayed 50% off.
Yeah. Kind of coincides for the RFU's or Winter International Series.
Well, possibly, but on the other hand, the RFU don't want.
That's me being cynical.
I know, but the RFU don't want the embarrassment of Saracens winning the Heineken Cup.
Probably not.
So they don't. They really don't, because it's going to be really embarrassing. All next, if Saracens win it, all next year. They'd be like South Africa. Remember, South Africa refused to accept that any World Cup before 1995 was an actual World Cup. Remember what Louis Lute said at the World Cup post-match dinner? South Africa have won the first real World Cup. The rest didn't count because we weren't playing.
So we're joined by Mick Sullivan, who's going to come in as a late replacement for John, who, as I said, is away getting his nails manicured. So Mick, your views on the game against Saracens at the weekend?
Jesus, Chase, that's an open question.
It is. Okay, well, right. We went through the team.
I'm getting more. Okay. I'm getting confident the closer I get. I think it's hard to judge because you don't know how good Leinster are. and we don't know anything about Saracens really, bar watching the kind of non-events that is the Premiership. I think sometimes the whole 24 unbeaten run, like 24, who did they beat? Ospreys, Academy at home and things like that. So at least Munster, and everyone gave out about Munster. Munster are never as bad as you think they are, and I just think Leinster aren't as good as we think they are, but I still think they've enough to beat Saracens. I just think that Saracens, if you're at the match the last time, Jason and Dave, they were a massive pack in the final. They were absolutely huge. And maybe it was a soccer pitch, but it seemed small and enclosed, and it looked as if they were massive. Will Skelton was immense that day. And, they had huge pack. Atoje was 6, and Cruz. So they're missing those two, and the one thing about Leinster, I think, and Irish teams, that they get beaten up sometimes because we're just not as big a men. And if you look at Racing the previous year, we just got to buy that one. And it was a huge pack in a wet day. I don't think Saracen have that huge pack anymore. And that's the big thing. And of course, Farrell not being there. But look, I'm more confident now than I had been, even last week and things like that. I think if Saracen keep on talking themselves up, saying this is our final, well, Leinster will be more aware of what's happening. Of course, it's a pity that there's no crowd there, but I think that what we have now is we have a big man in the back row, which is Caelan Doris, and we haven't had that in a long while, and that's even for Irish rugby. We haven't had a big 6. Ferris was the last big world-class 6 we had, and then you're going back to Philip Matthews days and things like that. We've had a lot of really good players like Quinlan and Easterby, but they're not big men. And if you're trying to beat teams like Saracens in South Africa, you need big men a lot of the time. So I think Darius is defined. I think he's fantastic. And we need someone to remember. Sean O'Brien was playing in the final last year, and Vardy in the back row. Like, they're not young men at that day. So now we have a lot younger back row. And I think, that'll, whether the Mako Vunipola playing is another thing, because he's a massive ball carrier for them. And even if he's on for 50 minutes, he takes the ball on so many times. And somebody has to tackle him, and it's normally 2. And it's normally fellas that are going to be absolutely knackered in the second half. And then the big brother takes it on in the wider channels and makes loads of hay. But, I just think, of course, I'm excited about it, quietly confident. But I think, if the line-out doesn't work, we're at nothing. We're giving balls away. And that's whatever the statistics say, 1 or 2 or 3 minutes away. It's all right giving it away to Munster. They're going to kick it back at you. But these guys, are really smart. They're a great team. And, they have that chip in the shoulder.
Myself and Jason were talking Codswallop earlier, because there's no greater experts on scrum half play than a former prop and a former lock. So we were talking about McGrath versus Gibson Park. As someone who was actually a scrum half, what would your thinking on that be?
Well, I think Luke McGrath is like an old kind of coat with this team. He just fits in. He knows how they work. And I think you saw that the last day. And Gibson Park, as good as he is, he's probably a better footballer than Luke McGrath. But Luke McGrath knows the heartbeat of this team. He's grown up with it. Do you know what I mean? He's nearly going to be a captain of it. I don't think he's particularly world class or international class, but I think he's really good for this team. I don't think he'd, be, pushing for the Irish team, but I just think he's a good mix. I think Gibson Park showed a bit jittery the last day because he was starting. I think Gibson Park is a snappier passer. Luke McGrath is very good at getting the ball away, but I just sometimes feel that sometimes it's inaccurate. It goes behind Johnny Sexton. It goes, and Sexton takes the ball so flat that if it's off a bit, he gets nailed. So I'm just my bugbear is that the standard of scrum halves is poor in Ireland, and has been. You know, it's just, I think the attitude is, if you're kind of 15, 16 and you're a brilliant fullback and you're not growing, they say he's a good footballer, put him in scrum half. But you wouldn't see that in New Zealand. You don't see, you know, too many 6'2", 6'3" scrum halves in New Zealand. They're all about, or Australia, they're all about getting the ball away, getting the ball like Stringer-esque. It's no coincidence that we had the best backline and the best player that's ever played at number 13, and we had Stringer in at scrum half, throwing the ball to an O'Gara who was putting it on a plate for O'Driscoll to make the outside lines. You know, it's a simple game, and I think your scrum halves have to be able to pass. I don't see anyone in Ireland that are good passers. I would say there's nearly 3 or 4 Welsh scrum halves better than what's second in Ireland. And then you throw in maybe a couple of Scots guys, you know, and the English, well, you know, scrum half play is nearly irrelevant because there's such a big pack, you know. But, you know, I just think that Luke, back to your question, I think Luke McGrath definitely, you know, he's, as I said, like he's at this stage, he's like a comfortable pair of shoes on that team. He's nothing, he's very brave. You know, he makes the odd good break. But, you know, if you want to be, he's a bit like what your man Wigglesworth was for Saracens. Never really made it at England, but he was great for Saracens. And I think that's the way Luke McGrath is. And Gibson Park, I think he's, you know, he spots James Lowe on those. It's not the first time we've seen those tries that he hits it so flat. I think he's a great, probably footballing brain, you know what I mean? But he'll be hard to press Luke McGrath, because I think it's like anything. They have Luke McGrath as nearly a vice captain at this stage, and they're not going to move him. And I don't think they should move him. But, you know, it's, you know, I think I'd love to see Luke McGrath's service better. That's what I would.
Yeah, I mean, like we were going through the back row earlier. Like, what would you play Van der Fleer, that man of the match against Ulster at the weekend? Would you play him over Connors, or would you go back to Connors?
Look, how do they play? You know, when Billy Vunipola plays well, England win. When Billy Vunipola plays well for Saracens, they definitely win. So I just think that, you know, the bit I've seen of this guy, Will Connors, is that he's a bit like your man, Dan Liviott, was it, from Wales? Yeah, he just gets the ankles. And remember Dan Liviott chopped tackling Ferris and O'Brien, you know what I mean, all the time. And we couldn't get any go-forward ball.
The quarter-final against Wales.
Yeah, but he did it several times. And Gatlin had a number on us with that. And so I just think Will Connors, to stop him dead. Do you know what I mean? Like, because once he gets going, I don't think, to me, Van der Fleer he's a really, really brilliant player. If those guys are going to run the ball out the back, he's going to stress your man. He's going to be all over. But if it's just tackle this lad, and he is, you know, their number one. The two Vunipolas are the number one ball carriers. Do you know what I mean? So if you can stop, you know, the Billy lad, that's going to be the thing. And that's why, well, I don't know, but I would say that's why Connors will be in there, because Van der Fleer is a brilliant player playing a different type of rugby. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it's a great situation to be in. I mean, if we were playing the game upright, if you like, you'd have Van der Fleer. But I have a feeling this game, in terms of the back row, is going to be played on the deck, or not on the deck, but close to the deck, or bringing guys down to the deck. And Will Connors is the man for that.
Yeah. But Dave, do you know what? You know, the thing about it is, Billy Vunipola, he's his brother carrying X amount of times every game, right? And he's making the hard yards. He might be only making a metre a time, but he's taking our lads out of it, and he's doing that 10 or 12 times. Like, I just read there the other day that Munster against Leinster, their front row only carried less than 5 times. Like, Billy Vunipola takes the ball on 10 times. And sure, I nearly feel sorry for CJ Stander, because he's taking the ball so much. The others are not taking it at all. So everyone's saying, poor, geez, CJ's not making much room. But CJ's taking it all the bloody time. Do you know what I mean? He's not going to have great stats, you know, because there's no one else taking the bloody thing. Like, Billy Vunipola takes it a yard or two away from the ruck, do you know, which is easier. Well, the brother is taking it, you know, right beside it, and he's, you know, it's a different, you know. So
I think going back to that Munster match, I think Caelan Barris carried the ball more than the entire Munster pack.
Yes, he did. Yeah, his individual stats are greater than the entire Munster pack stats.
Do you know? But it's great, and it keeps you excited to see a fantastic player coming on the scene. And you know, he's, you know, you hear about all these players going up and all that, and you wonder whether they're going to make it. This guy he's great. He's fantastic. It's just beating tackles like Sean O'Brien and Rocky Elsom. That's what we need. You know what I mean? You know, that's what Leinster need, Ireland need. Do you know what I mean? Because we don't have that. You know,
he's clever with it. He's clever. I mean,
yeah.
When he chooses to go and where he chooses to go and when he carries and when he doesn't carry, he makes those choices very well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And look, he's exciting, and it's exactly what we need. And he's in at 6. I think our back row, I don't know whether you tipped on our back row, are stronger this year than last year.
Yeah, we said that. That's what we made that point. All right. Yeah, I agree with you entirely. It's younger, it's fresher. And it's in better form. I mean, last year we had guys, I mean, Fardy was great. Sean O'Brien's a great servant to the club. Jack Conan was just coming back from injury, but they weren't entirely in form. Whereas this year, you look at the 3 of them, and or the 4 of them, if you include Van der Fleer. And myself and Jason were saying earlier that neither of us would even contemplate using Dan Levy for this game. So you've got a whole host of guys there. But of the 4 that are involved in this game or potentially involved in this game, all 4 are in top form.
Yeah.
Would you countenance bringing Fardy back into the second row?
No. I'd have him on the bench.
Yeah.
I think Toner reacts better starting than coming on, doesn't he?
Oh God, Jason, what's our weakest point? Is the line out. Jesus, you know, it's a lot easier for a hooker to hit a 6'10" fella. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And James Ryan will, you know, or whoever's running it, you know, I don't think he called anything on himself the last day. He's probably knackered, but it's great to have him back. You know what I mean? Japers, you know what I mean? And I think last time I saw Ireland playing England, James Ryan, obviously, I think he'll have a go at Itoje. He had a go against Ireland, England. Itoje started ruling the pack the last few times. Do you know what I mean? Remember he got, who was it, Keith Earls. He went late on Keith Earls. Do you remember? Didn't get sin binned. And he did a few things. You know, he was the man to take on. He was the Paul O'Connell kind of. But the last day, Ryan, you know, hit him late a couple of times. And I think Ryan is going to go after Itoje. And Joe, what?
I just like Ryan is no longer the young, fresh-faced boy on the team. Exactly. He needs to kind of take over the Paul O'Connell. Yeah. Not thug. I don't think he can be a thug in rugby anymore. I think it's too strict, too many cameras, but just a bit of a hard man enforcer.
Yeah, I think he will. I think he will, because I saw it the last time against him. You know, because look, he's going to be on the lines, obviously, with Itoje, and everyone's saying Itoje is better than him and all that. But I think Ryan will you'll see it, an element to him that, you know, is developing, I think. And of course, he's a fantastic player. Look, it's exciting, but God, they play great rugby, Leinster. Do you know what I mean? It's, you know, they play great rugby. And Saracens, up until recently, you know, played awful stuff. Like, you just kick the ball away all the time and then let you make mistakes and pressurize you, and they're a big pack and you couldn't move them. And that was it, you know. So, you know, I as you said before,
do you remember I was going to say, do you remember the quarter-final or the semi-final against Munster a couple of seasons ago? And they just kept kicking the ball back to Munster, and Munster couldn't do anything with it.
Yeah, no.
They were just been hit on the line, on the game line.
Yeah.
The wolf pack.
Yeah, but you know, in fairness to Mark McCall, he's brought that exciting, you know, they play a lot. Like, what I couldn't get over the last time in the final, and the seats that we're sitting on, you know, when Saracens got the ball, it eventually go to Liam Williams. And from start to finish, they made about 50, 60 yards without a tackle going in. And at least what Leinster have done against Munster this season and against Ulster, they're doing this rush defence. They hadn't, well, I don't think they've been doing this to the same. Like, Van der Fleer was at your man all the time, Billy Burns, and they're up in front. And what's his name? Henshaw. The fact that Henshaw went for an intercept shows you how close they were. Well, last year in the final, they were letting them run easy yards. I couldn't get over it. Do you know what I mean? And only that in the first half, only that Liam Williams knocked on a couple of times, or someone knocked on a couple of times, scrum to Leinster. Do you know what I mean? And we got back out and things. But I think the defence is much better against Saracens, because that's the way they play against you all the time. So I think there'll be an awful lot of chips through and things like that. I think that Sexton's going to chip through a lot and things like that in this match.
There's more variety to the team this year than.
I think Henshaw's been kicking well this year, since the return. Doing lots of little chips, that whole kind of Crusaders thing. We've been kicking further out than not necessarily just Sexton.
Yeah, no, and I must say that the last day, which Ross Byrne and his touch kicking was phenomenal. Like he squeezed out another 20-30 yards that Johnny doesn't even get. Do you know?
And you could see, and Billy Burns went for one, and he made about 10. Sorry, Billy Burns went for one touch kick, and he probably made about 10 meters.
Yeah,
it was a penalty, and he kicked it from the halfway line to the 10-meter line, whereas Ross Byrne was kicking it from the halfway line to the 5-meter line up at the on the Ulster try line.
Yeah,
Jay, we're reaching the file size limit here, so we better.
Okay, lads, can I just ask you quickly for? Just ask you quickly, lads, for predictions for the other quarterfinals. Claremont Racing.
Claremont.
Who are at home? Claremont.
Claremont.
Claremont at home.
Racing. I think Racing.
Okay. Toulouse versus. There's no correct. Toulouse versus Ulster.
Toulouse.
Exeter Saints.
Exeter. Oh, Exeter.
Saints, of course, were from our group where we saw them a couple of times. They were quite poor. Anyway, boys, as ever, thanks a million. Mick, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
The Leinster win by about 3 points.
Good man, Mick. Very optimistic. Dave, what's your prediction for the Leinster game?
I actually think that it'll be close enough until about 20 minutes to go, and I think Leinster's bench will take it away from them. So I'm going to say 7 or 8 points.
Excellent. Good optimism. Boys, thanks very much. Michael, thanks very much for subbing in. Much appreciated.
David Flair, Clough.